Good morning, everybody. This is Don Medellin in the Applied Sciences Bureau. I wanted to welcome you to the workshop. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. We'll see if we can't get a few more people online. The number of people are coming on as we just at the moment. So we'll just give it a couple more and we'll get started. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. This is Don Medellin. I think I've got a couple minutes after the hour, so we're waiting for a few more people to log on to the Zoom meeting, but I think we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, let me say I appreciate all of you participating in the first rule development workshop, and especially as a webinar rather than a face-to-face meeting. We would always much rather meet you face-to-face and speak with you face-to-face, but in the changing times, I appreciate your willingness to take time out of your schedules and participate in the workshop today. So to begin with, I'm going to have Lawrence Glenn, who is our Director of Water Resources, give a brief introduction. Lawrence?
Thank you, Don. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first of two workshops on the EAA Reservoir Water EAA Reservoir Water Reservation Rule Development. That's a lot of words there. I'd like to let you know that the team has compiled an outstanding series of presentations to walk you through the technical basis for the rule, and then we'll go through the draft rule itself. So the technical document on which the rule is based recently went through a positive peer review by an expert panel, and the team has worked earnestly to address the comments provided in the final peer review panel report and has incorporated that information in a revised technical document, with the end result being that the draft rule that you will see today is based in very sound science. We appreciate your participation in today's workshop. I want to let you know there will be ample opportunity for your comments to be heard during the meeting. And so with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Don Medellin. He's a principal scientist at the district, and he is the project manager for this effort. So thank you very much for your attendance today.
Thank you, Lawrence. So why don't we go ahead through the format for today's meeting, just take a few minutes and go over this so that you understand how to engage with our staff throughout the workshop. On the Zoom toolbar, there is a Q&A feature. And so if you click on that, you'll be able to ask one or more questions, and you can do that throughout the workshop. And once we have the questions, we'll address those during the public comment period or public comment portions of the agenda. And then we'll provide live answers from our staff based on those questions we've received. And I would ask you, as much as possible, please be specific about your questions and maybe even indicate the slide number or presenter that you're referring the question to. And if you have, you like the questions that are being asked, there's also a little feature there that's kind of a little thumbs up, and you can upvote that same question. And what will happen is it will prioritize those questions further up, in the list, and we'll make sure we address those comments. And all of the questions asked at the workshop today will be documented for staff to provide written answers and as well as the live answers. But you can all take a look at those after the workshop. So that's the format for the Zoom today. And let me just go over now the agenda. The agenda will have a series of presentations, as you can see. And then at the conclusion of these 4 presentations, there will be 2 public comment periods. One immediately after the presentations, and then there will be another public comment period after the draft rule language. And as I indicated before, you can ask questions at any time during this entire workshop. So we'll be sure to capture all those questions in the feature, the Q&A feature. And during the 2 public comment periods, our moderator will indicate the name of the person submitting the question. They will repeat the question out loud, and then our staff will provide live answers for everybody to hear. And so finally, let me just say that all of the presentation material today has been developed to address many of the public comments that we've received after the public peer review session that occurred on May 29th that Lawrence referenced. So hopefully we've answered some of those questions through the presentation material today. And with that, we'll kind of move forward. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer Brown in our Office of Counsel. Jennifer?
Good morning, everyone. We're just gonna briefly go through the rule development process that the district has to comply with when we adopt rules, including the water reservation rules, both the legal authority and the process that that authority requires of us. So for those of you who like to see the statute, here we go. 373.223 sub 4 is our authority to adopt water reservations. The board, the governing board or the department can reserve from use by permit applicants water in such locations and quantities as for such seasons of the year as in its judgment may be required for the protection of fish and wildlife or public health and safety. Reservations are subject to periodic review in light of changed conditions. However, all existing legal uses of water are protected so long as they're not contrary to the public interest. Next slide. So broken down by bullets, we adopt water reservations by rule. That adoption of that rule protects it from being allocated to consumptive uses. There are only 2 reasons why we do water reservations that are authorized to us by statute. It's to protect fish and wildlife or public health and safety. Again, all water reservations are subject to review and revision in light of changed conditions. And all existing legal users are protected provided they are not contrary to the public interest. And for those of you who may remember out there, when we were doing the C43 water reservation, that was the subject of the final order that was challenged by Conservancy of Southwest Florida versus South Florida Water Management District. So for anybody interested in reading that case, it's available on DOA. And you can do a word search in that. The district is also subject to various rulemaking requirements. All of our rules have to be consistent with the Water Resource Implementation Rule. That is a rule adopted by DEP in Chapter 62-40 that all water management district rules must be consistent with. DEP reviews our rules for consistency. We also have to follow the rulemaking requirements in Chapter 120 and 28 and Chapter 28. These things require the rule not be arbitrary and capricious, not modify, enlarge, or exceed the delegated legislative authority. It requires us to follow the process. And we also have to follow the Department of State rules. Those are mostly about form, like font size, indentation, numbering. Those are, and then we also have to follow the governor's November 11, 2019 directive that says no unnecessary, duplicative, repetitive rules. So please go forward. So a little bit more detail about the Water Resource Implementation Rule governing water reservations. That's found at 62-40.474 Florida Administrative Code. The periodic reviews should be at least every 5 years. And there's a list in that rule of what we can use reservations for. And the one that we are using here is to aid in the restoration of natural systems which provide fish and wildlife habitat. Next page. So this is a CERT project. And so there are state statutes that are integrated with the federal process. So 373.470 sub 3 sub C is of particular importance in this rulemaking process. So before a PCA with the Corps can be executed, the district, in cooperation with the Corps, has to do a project implementation report that addresses the feasibility and environmental benefits on other factors in 373.1501. And then each PIR, project implementation report, shall identify the increase in water supplies resulting from the project, and the additional water supply must be allocated or reserved by the district under this chapter. And so then that links you back to the 373.223 sub 4 we referenced earlier. And so if you want to advance the next slide. So WRDA 2000 requires that water made available by the CERT project for the natural system be protected. Again, it requires the district to use its reservation or allocation authority. The PIRs, which must be done for these projects, must identify that water supply, the water supply for the natural system and for other related needs. And that reservation or allocation protection must be done before a project partnership agreement, which is the cost share agreement for federal funding for construction and operation, can be executed. So one of the comments that we received as part of the peer review process is, why now? This is too early. So as we know, this reservoir is one of the governor's priority projects, and the district is doing everything it can to get this constructed and operational. And so to do that, we need the project partnership agreement to be executed, and the Corps and the district can't do that until this water reservation process is done. Next slide. And so we are looking at initiating construction in the fall of next year, which means, I'm going to do the timeline backwards, which means that we are looking at executing the project partnership agreement in May. And we need a little bit of lead time from the rule being effective until the agreement gets done. So we are really trying to target an effective date of January 7, 2021 of the rule going into effect. Next slide. And so to comply with the requirements of Chapter 120, which lays out a lot of timing requirements, we're looking at a rule adoption hearing, publishing the notice of rule adoption in November, which means publishing the notice of proposed rule in September, and the various workshops. The 14th is we're here today. We're also looking at having a second one in August. So, you know, that's the lead time that we need in order to begin construction of the reservoir project. Next slide. So we have already some water reservations on the books. All of our water reservations are found at chapter 40E10, in chapter 40E10. We've got the Fakahatchee-Picayune Strand Reservation, the North Fork of the St. Lucie River, the Nearshore Central Biscayne Bay Reservation, and the Caloosahatchee C43 West Basin Storage Reservoir. This is a prospective water reservation. And so we have done those before. The North Fork of the St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee River are prospective water reservations that we have on the books. And for those of us who love to follow our rulemaking efforts, we are also doing the Kissimmee River Reservation presently. All in all, 172,000 acres under water reservation. So chapter 120 also requires that the rule not be arbitrary and capricious. And so the district takes a number of steps in order to comply with that requirement. We identify the water reservation body. You'll see that on the next slide. We characterize the hydrology. We identify the fish and the wildlife to be protected. We establish links between those two items. We define the volume of water that is needed. And all of that information is generated in the draft technical report that was the subject of the peer review that Don mentioned. Next slide. So you'll see these two maps as we go through the rule presentations today. The reservation water body is the reservoir itself, which is the map to your left. The reservoir provides 240,000 acre feet of static storage and delivers water to the Central Everglades. It's to benefit the fish and wildlife in the Central Everglades. And we're focusing on the water that is in and out of the SERP project itself. There are other rules that protect the water already in the conservation areas. That's usually referred to as the LEC Water Availability Rule, which is also part of the Loxahatchee MFL recovery strategy. And so I'm going to turn it over to Leslie Waugh, who's going to talk more about the background and the purpose.
Here. Good morning, everybody. This is Leslie Waugh. I'm a lead project manager for planning for the Central Everglades Planning Project and the EAA Reservoir Project. And I'm just going to go over the background and purpose of the project. Some of these slides we saw at the peer review session, so I'll go through some of them a little quickly, but if you have questions, be sure to put those in the Q&A box and we can address those during the Q&A section. Next slide, Dawn. Thank you. So the project purpose. The purpose of the Central Everglades Planning Project is to improve the quantity, quality, timing, and distribution of water flows from Lake Okeechobee to the Central Everglades. And that includes the water conservation areas, 3A, 3B, Everglades National Park, and down to Florida Bay, while also maintaining flood control and water supply for existing legal users. The project redirects flow from Lake Okeechobee south to the Central Everglades, which will result in decreased damaging discharges to the northern estuaries from Lake Okeechobee and increased restoration flows to the Everglades. And all the project purpose and details and features are documented in the project implementation report. The original one was completed in 2014. The post-authorization change report, you'll also hear this called the PACR. That was completed by the district in 2018, and also the environmental impact statement that was completed by the Army Corps of Engineers this year. So just a quick overview of the Central Everglades Planning Project, or CEP, which is a component of the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, or SERP. Congress authorized CEP in WRDA 2016, and then with the authorization of the PACR in 2018, the storage feature of the project, which originally included the A2 flow equalization basin was modified to the EAA Reservoir and A2 STA, along with canal improvements to the Miami and North New River canals. And then the rest of the set features have remained the same. And those are listed here and also shown on the map for reference. So during development of the PACR, the district evaluated multiple alternatives to increase storage and treatment in the EAA. The alternative that was selected as the recommended plan was alternative C240A. And in all the supporting documents for the EAA reservoir and also throughout this presentation, you'll see reference to C240 or C240A. And this is just the designation for the model run for the selected alternative. And that included the 240,000 acre foot reservoir and the 6,500 acre stormwater treatment area. And this alternative was the most cost effective. And it also included multi-purpose operations of the reservoir. So it provides water for the environment as well as water for other water related needs. And that was also consistent with the reservoir envisioned in SERP. And it's these multi-purpose operations of the reservoir which helps to fill and empty the reservoir throughout the year. And that provides the most benefit to the downstream environment, including the fish and wildlife. So I just want to do a quick overview of how the water moves through the project. So once constructed, water stored in the EAA reservoir will be conveyed through the North New River and Miami canals. And water flows into the project through the inflow-outflow canal, and then it's pumped into the reservoir. And what's inside the reservoir, water can be discharged through 4 outlet structures. Water can go to the east to the A1 flow equalization basin. It can go south to stormwater treatment areas 2 and 3-4, or west to the new A2 stormwater treatment area. And there's a 4th outlet structure on the north side that water can be discharged back into the inflow-outflow canal. And then that can be returned back to the North New River and Miami canals to maintain canal levels when capacity is available. This multi-purpose operation allows for the reservoir to send water back to the EAA basin. And then that helps make room in the reservoir to capture future rainfall events and releases from Lake Okeechobee. And the water released to the adjacent storage and treatment facilities will be treated and conveyed south to the water conservation areas. So the EAA reservoir provides 240,000 acre feet of static storage. And based on the model simulation using the C240 run and the draft project operating manual that's in the PACR and in the EIS, on average, it's estimated that 825,000 acre feet of water annually will be discharged from the reservoir to the adjacent storage and treatment facilities. And generally flows will be captured by the reservoir during the wet season and carried over to the dry season. And with the addition of the EAA reservoir in the stormwater treatment area, the SEP project will provide an additional 370,000 acre feet of flows above the current flows going to the Central Everglades on an average annual basis. And that increase in freshwater flow of 370,000 acre feet average annual exceeds the estimated flow that was to be provided by SERP. So the benefits in the PACR by adding the storage of the EAA reservoir are dependent on moving water south from Lake Okeechobee. And this water reservation focuses on the water stored in the reservoir. And we're using the C240 model run to estimate that flow volume. But to send water south, it was recognized in the planning documents that the Lake Okeechobee schedule would need to be modified. So in the future, the Corps and the district will need to modify the lake schedule. And I know there's a current lake schedule update going on now with LOSOM, the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual. And if you've been following that process, you'll know that the EAA reservoir is not included in that scope. So the EAA reservoir will be included in a lake schedule that is after this first iteration of LOSUM. So it'll be the schedule, the next schedule. So with the addition of the EAA reservoir, SEP now meets the SERP target for restoration flows to the Everglades. And as I mentioned before, the reservoir will allow for wet season flows to be captured and carried over to the dry season. And this figure is a good illustration comparing the timing of those treated flows to the Central Everglades with the additional storage of the EAA reservoir. And that's shown in the red line, which is the C240 run. And that's compared to the existing condition, which is the blue line. So you can see in the dry season months of the year, the increased flows that you get with the additional storage. And those additional flows will provide ecological benefits to the Central Everglades, including increased hydro periods, restoring vegetative communities and habitats for fish and wildlife. So there are a few planning documents that have been developed for SEP and the EAA reservoir, and I just want to take a minute to discuss the relationship between them. So the PACR, the post-authorization change report, and the environmental impact statement document the plan formulation and the selection of C240A as the recommended plan. And the selection of that alternative as the recommended plan is supported by all the hydrologic model simulations that we did in the C240 run. And that used the draft project operating manual and other model assumptions that are documented in the PACR and the EIS. And that model simulation is also the basis for the ecological benefits provided by the project and the project assurances, and also the savings clause analysis that was met. And again, all that's documented in the PACR and the EIS. And just to make sure everybody is aware, as a reminder, just to remember that that analysis is based on the completed project. So all the set features in place. And then the reservoir operations are based on the draft operating manual that's in the PACR and the EIS. And the technical document that supports the water reservation uses the same model run, the C240, but it focuses on the hydrologic and ecological benefits to fish and wildlife to the Central Everglades. So it shows how the water to be reserved under this water reservation protects fish and wildlife. So the PACR also fulfills project assurances, which is required by WRDA 2000, and Jennifer Brown mentioned that earlier in her presentation. And in the PACR, the water provided by the project was identified and quantified at the point that it reaches the natural system. So in this case, that's the northern boundary of the water conservation areas. And on the map, that boundary is indicated by the red line. Next slide. But for the water reservation process, we quantify the water made available by the project that's needed for the protection of fish and wildlife. And in this case, we're looking at the water delivered from the reservoir. So that's the water provided by the SERP project feature. And based on the same model simulation, the C240, it's estimated to be 825,000 acre feet average annual discharge from the reservoir through those three structures, and that goes south to the Everglades. After it goes to the other treatment and storage facilities, it goes south to the Everglades. And this quantity of water and its need for the protection of wildlife, fish and wildlife, is described in the technical document. Sorry. Consistent with SERP, the reservoir is a multi-purpose project, and as part of the operations, water can be delivered from the reservoir through the S628 structure, and that's discharged to the north, back into the inflow-outflow canal, and then back into the Miami and North New River canals when capacity is available to maintain canal levels. And based on the C240 model simulation, that volume is estimated to be 82,000 acre feet of water on an average annual basis. And this water is not included in the water reservation, so it's not reserved for fish and wildlife. And this information was also not quantified in the PACR, so it's new information as far as calculating that number. It's still using the C240 model run, but it will be included in the final technical document to support the water reservation. So water for other water-related needs, project assurances, which is required by WRDA 2000 and Section 373, tells us to identify water for the natural system and water for other water-related needs. And in the 2014 SEP PIR, the project implementation report, water was identified for the lower East Coast service area, which was dependent on increased seepage across the East Coast Protection Levee. And that's when the project is fully built and operational. But for the savings clause, which protects, so saving clause protects the level of service for flood control and water supply for existing legal users. And that was evaluated and documented for SEP and the EAA reservoir in the PACR and the EIS. And again, based on the C240 model simulation, the savings clause requirements were met by the project. And the water supply for the Lake Okeechobee service area is met by water stored in Lake Okeechobee. And these two figures support that analysis. Just to show you an example, the figure on the left shows the reduction in cutback volumes by the project when it's in place. So again, the C240 model run, which is the green bar, compared to existing condition and feature without. And then the figure on the right shows the slight increase in the stage duration of Lake Okeechobee when compared to the existing conditions. But that's all documented in the PACR and the EIS. So now Don Yoon Lee, he'll give you a brief overview of the hydrologic and ecological benefits of the project.
Thanks, Leslie. Don, could you? Yes. Okay. All right. This is Dong-Yun Lee. I'm a senior scientist from Everglades section. And before I start, a lot of staff from the Hydrology Hydraulics Bureau, Appliance Science Bureau, U.S. Geological Survey, and Department of Interior staff contributed to this portion of technical report. So today, what I want to share in this section is how we establish a linkage between hydrologic change and fish and wildlife responses with the implementation of EAA Reservoir. So I will try to first explain why the project was designed this way and what kinds of hydrologic model were used. And finally, how much hydrologic change we are expecting with the project. Then I will show how all expected change promote a shift in vegetation and increase the abundance or habitat condition of indicator species. So we utilize a variety of models that focus on different disciplines such as hydrology, water quality, and ecology. We use them in a way that they either work together or feed the information with each other. So we can have a comprehensive view of what's happening as we implement different project features. But it is important to note that the effort for designing the reservoir is to change the already authorized Central Everglades Planning Project, SEP. So the tool we use in the EAA Reservoir project follow the guiding principle of the SEP technical work. And the majority of tools we use have a high degree of acceptability, and they have been calibrated and validated independently and scientifically peer-reviewed. So basically what we are doing is the modification of a SEP plan. which is already addressed in the post-authorization change report, or PACR. And the report adapted a new reservoir, EAA Reservoir, sized of 240,000 acre-feet with a new stormwater treatment area. With these modifications, we can meet the goal of comprehensive Everglades restoration plan. And among many tested plan, selected plan is alternative C240, which meets planning objective and reasonably maximize environmental benefit while passing other tests. And as Leslie already explained, all other detailed information and project design is provided in this technical report and other document. And I'm going to go over modeling tools simulated under the existing condition and alternative C240. So the first tool we used is the Regional Simulation Model, or RSM, developed by Southwater, Florida Water Management District. And this model simulates the coupled movement of groundwater, surface water, man-made structure, and network canal in South Florida in this modeling domain. And the model provides daily output of water stage, depths, ponding depths, flow, and even water budget. And the model has a relatively good degree of accuracy with a typical bias of something like 0.2 of the foot relative to the historical data. Just in case you are not aware of how we use this model in planning, we use a set of infrastructure and operation within the system that were already in place when the PACR was initiated. Then we rerun a historical climate to the simulation framework, including other model inputs. So we basically throw environmental and climate condition at the current and projected infrastructure and operation, and see what are the expected change in hydrology and whether it achieves what we want to accomplish. And the simulation of the modeling simulation period is from 1965 to 2005, which include or capture normal or average condition or even extreme climate conditions such as drought or hurricane. And output from the model is fed into a whole set of post-processing tool to summarize the RSM output in a more meaningful way. And these include the performance indicators such as soil oxidation, inundation pattern, or habitat suitability for ecological model. And this is one example showing the direction and magnitude of overland flow for the period of record from 1965 to 2005 between the current existing condition on the left and with implementation of EAA project and other features on the right. So we talk about the reservoir is sized to accommodate additional 370,000 acre-feet flow. But we are not just storing water into the reservoir for a while and dumping into the current system. But we are doing things like a timing shift to send more water during the dry season and backfilling canal, Miami Canal, to promote sheet flow and opening up some structure, existing structure, to get the water out of conservation area to downstream into the Everglades National Park. So all these modifications are to resemble historical flow pattern of the natural system. So you can see the flow vector in Northern 3A spreading out across the area and also in the Northeast Shark River Slough. And this project also restore a historical connectivity between Shark River Slough and Taylor Slough, which can promote more water down to Florida Bay. And another example is the duration of inundation, in other words, hydro period. So hydro period map with the blue right here, indicating longer or long inundation up to 365 days. And long hydro period can reduce the potential for fire risk and soil oxidation, which facilitate transition from upland to wetland vegetation, and even help re-establish a ridge and slough landscape pattern in Northern 3A. As you can see, from the green or light green to dark blue in Northern 3A. And change in 3B is quite unique from blue and another little shorter hydro period to very long hydro period, as you can see on this map. Despite the fact that less water come into Northern 3B, now change in the operation and structure, because of that, water evenly spread out across the 3B. And northeast Shark River Slough will become deeper for a longer period of time, as you can see from here to here. And this wetting trend is found further downstream in Shark River Slough, which is a key restoration benefit. And from a stage perspective, it is consistent from what we see in other previous graphics. So this is the normalized duration curve, basically showing the combined response of water level change relative to land surface elevation in the 1965 to 2005. So we can get a lot of information from this graph. So for example, this line graph shows the model output under existing condition, and this dashed line shows the output under the alternative C240. So we can see that maximum water depth increase about 0.5 feet in Northern 3A. Average water depth also increased by about 0.7 to 0.8 feet. And hydro period increased by about approximately 2 months in Northern 3A. So it looks obvious that improvement in depth and hydro period in Northern 3A will be very beneficial to the landscape and vegetation, and of course, organism living therein. And Southern 3A, shown with the green star and this graph, despite of increased flow because of implementation of reservoir, water depths are not very different between the two model output, but somewhat actually reduced in high end. In other words, the wet season, peak wet season under under C240, and that will reduce the potential for flooding stress in 3 Island. This is because water coming into the Northern 3A now has an improved way to get out and go to the desired location. So you can see that northeast Shark River Slough, shown in this red star, indeed making large improvement in water depth throughout the year and longer hydro period, about 45 days. So another post-processing is ecological planning tool, which allow us to link hydrology to ecology. So joint ecosystem modeling team, shown right here, team took the output of hydrological modeling and performed ecological model to identify what the expected outcomes are for many different indicator species, which I list in this table. So all these organisms are highly important and early warning indicator because their abundance, distribution, or habitat suitability score increase our capacity to understand ecosystem status and manage the ecosystem restoration. So the restoration target for organisms on the left side or table is set by a pre-drainage hydrologic condition simulated by the natural system model. And the restoration target for higher trophic levels on this table is set by historical data set. And not surprisingly, hydrologic variable or the model input are water depth or dry duration, wet duration, hydro period, or rate of changing water depth are most important variable in different model and explain the largest variance in the abundance, population, or habitat score of these indicator species. So more detailed information, assumption, model design, and result and discussion are provided in the technical document. But in this presentation, I will only share the model output of apple snail. So apple snail can be found in emergent long hydro period wetland. And apple snail is an exclusive diet of the Everglades endangered snail kite. So snail kite survival directly depend on the hydrology and habitat, which can support apple snail. So this map shows the model output under existing condition baseline, with a darker color showing the high apple snail population up to one adult apple snail per meter square, approximately. And as you can see, apple snail population and density is very high in southern 3A, 3B, a little less, but significantly high in the Shark River Slough and coastal zone of Everglades National Park. And the map on the right side shows the difference between the two models. So basically we subtract the population distribution under existing condition baseline from the expected alternative C240 model. So now it showed color shows the difference between model with the improvement in green color and decrease in population or density in red color. So it looks clearly shows that there are large increase in apple snail population in northern 3A and a little less, but significant increase in central 3A and a little in the coastal zone of Everglades National Park. And when we subtract this red area from green area, basically showing the net increase of snail population in 300,000 acre approximately. And when we compare the apple snail population for the entire model domain between the model, snail population is 41% higher under increased water flow relative to the existing condition. With that, the probability of abundance of snail kite nest increased by a factor of approximately 2. So these model results explain that alternative C240 increased the spatial extent of suitable foraging opportunity for snail kite. So in conclusion, EAA reservoir will provide long-term benefit to wetland vegetation, perform generally well for all trophic levels. This is possible because increase in hydro period and connectivity will facilitate vegetation shift, favoring aquatic production, particularly in northern 3A and northeast Shark River Slough. So we also provide a score of the model, different model, from the major improvement representing the landscape scale improvement, and minor improvement is more localized change in the abundance or habitat score. So on the left table, hydrologic improvement and vegetation shift will result in high prey density to a level of minor to moderate improvement for these important prey resources. Also, hydrologic improvement provide a long-term benefit on the spatial extent of suitable foraging and nesting habitat for higher trophic levels. But there are some localized negative response in wading bird foraging condition and alligator habitat suitability, especially in southeastern 3A, due to decrease in ponding depths and hydro period. Cape Sable seaside sparrow model output is a little more complex, but there is a mixed picture of wet prairie model result showing that there are some positive change and negative change. So we just give a score of no change. But areas of negative ecological response are relatively smaller than overall beneficial effect, so that we give a slightly lower but positive score for higher trophic levels. This is all I have, but please find chapter 3 and 4 in the technical document to find more in-depth discussion about hydrologic improvement within Water Conservation Area 3 and Everglades National Park, and how the condition created by the reservoir will restore multiple habitat type, which will provide a critical ecological function for a multitude of fish and wildlife. With that, I will pass to Don.
Thank you, Danyun. All right. With that, I'm going to go over a summary of the peer review comments that we received during the public peer review session. I know many of y'all had attended that, and so we're just going to provide a highlight and summary of that, along with a brief summary of the public comments that we've received. So an overview of the peer review process, as Lawrence indicated, and we indicated earlier, on May 29th, we had a public peer review workshop with the public, as well as the peer review panel and district staff, gave everybody an opportunity to have a very robust discussion about the science associated with the technical document. And the purpose of why we do the peer review is to seek a non-biased scientific review, and to ensure that the scientific approach is solid. And so when we go through these peer reviews, we like to ensure that the technical approaches, the modeling, the assumptions, et cetera, are really solid from a science standpoint. And usually when we go through these peer reviews, it almost always ends up in a improved final product. And the draft technical report that is out there on a webpage now and has been out there for the last 2 weeks has a lot of the comments, recommendations from the peer review panel incorporated already into the technical document. And then the other reason that we do a scientific peer review is to ensure that the rule development process stays on schedule. And so when we went through the peer review, the objective of that was to review the technical document as well as review the water reservation approach. And so we asked the peer review panel, some key questions, like, does the technical document convey the purposes, the strength, and the limitations, et cetera? And are all the data, the interpretations, the assumptions associated with the models, et cetera, is it sufficient to identify the water needed to protect fish and wildlife? So those are kind of the key questions that we asked our peer review panel. And they provided preliminary comments and then ultimately provided a final report. So the district response, we developed a question and answer matrix as a result of the public peer review session to address not only the peer review panel's comments, but also the public comments that came up during that session. And we also developed some frequently asked questions, and those are out there on our webpage as well. And then we developed the revised technical document dated June 2020. So the revised technical document that is out there now addresses the panel as well as the public concerns that were addressed at the May 29th workshop. And so the goal here as we move forward is to try and get the public comments for this this next workshop today, to have those in to us by July 28th. And the reason that we have a 2-week time frame after the workshop is because we've already put that documentation out there 2 weeks before the workshop to give you an opportunity to view that documentation and to ask questions during the workshop today. And then ultimately, once we get those public comments, the last round of public comments, our goal is to try and finalize the technical document by August the 4th. So here are some of the hydrologic comments that we received from the peer review panel, and the panel's concern on the left-hand side and the district response on the right. And overall, they had some concerns regarding the hydrologic changes, specifically about ponding depth, to make sure, you know, that some of the areas weren't too deep and that it wasn't exacerbating certain areas that are already too deep. And then they also had questions about hydro period and overland flow. The district provided a lot of information to provide more indicator regions, as well as provided additional figures that Don Yoon went over in his presentation in slides 34 through 36, which talked about overland flow. It talked about the annual hydro period and duration. So a lot of that information was provided to the peer review panel and shortly after the peer review session or during the session itself. So we provided all of this information, and as a result, all of that is now incorporated into the technical document. Some other comments that we received from the panel were ecologically based, and so they had concerns about wading birds, and they had a challenging time trying to link the ecological responses to the hydrological components, and that linkage was a little bit challenging because of how some of the hydrologic data was organized. So we straightened all that out and answered a lot of their questions. We've provided follow-up maps to address their concerns to show the benefit to wading birds. And on fish, we provided updates on the fish density. The crayfish was a little bit challenging in that we didn't have a model that was easily and readily available for us. So the panel asked a lot of questions about that, and we provided information specifically about to address our 2 main areas, and that was on the western marl prairies as well as the northern portions of Water Conservation Area 3A. And what that showed was that there was sloughs and shallow moderate depths, and occasional drying conditions usually produces higher densities of crayfish, and so that's what they were looking for. So we provided that information. And then for the alligator, there were some unexplained negative responses. So we provided more information to show where that would happen and try to answer their questions accordingly. So we addressed all that and incorporated that into the technical document as well. And finally, some of the other comments were regarding apple snails, and you saw a little preview of the information that was from the model that Don Yoon went over for the apple snail. And also there were questions about water quality and phosphorus. And specifically what they asked for was, where the concentration of phosphorus was going to occur, and was phosphorus mobilization going to occur. And we let the peer review panel know that our statutory, under this water reservation, our statutory authority is limited regarding water quality. However, we do provide and size our STAs based on a flow-weighted mean, long-term flow-weighted mean, and our modeling is designed to size the STAs accordingly to try and meet water quality standards. And overall, the risk is relatively low compared to the project benefits, and they agreed with that. And then finally, the adaptive management, they said it was not explicitly addressed. We provided a couple more things in the technical document. And with that, we addressed that through our technical document that is currently out there. So let me go over a few of the public comments, the letters that we received from stakeholders. We received a total of 8 different letters, and you can see the entities indicated here. And let me indicate, as I indicated at the beginning of the presentation of the workshop today, that the presentation material was specifically designed today to address almost all of those public comments. But here's the public comments we received. This is just a brief summary of those. One, it did an excellent job of laying out the technical basis for the reservation. That particular entity said that, that we did a great job of laying out the factual basis with the most up-to-date tools, the metrics and scientific literature, et cetera. We needed more clarity on the quantity of water reserved for fish and wildlife versus what is not reserved. And you saw in Leslie's presentation, we tried to address that and clarify what water is not reserved and that it would be provided to meet regional water supply needs for existing legal users. So we tried to make that more clear. More information on our operating plan to demonstrate that no impacts would occur to existing legal users. In particular, the savings clause provisions, and make sure the impacts don't occur to natural systems, such as the water catchment area in the Loxahatchee River watershed. Another comment we received is that they felt like the water reservation was premature before the new Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule is completed. And then we also updated model references and ecological sections as well. So some of the changes that we made to the technical document, I just wanted to highlight these for you and to make sure you understood where these changes are to kind of help you look through the technical document a little bit quicker if you wanted to see the specific changes that were made. We made it available again, shortly after the May 29th workshop. And the EAA A2 reservoir was changed throughout the document to reflect the EAA reservoir to be consistent in our naming. So that was changed throughout. We revised the executive summary to provide a brief summary of both the hydrologic and ecological changes that was recommended again by the peer review panel. We clarified that the water in the EAA reservoir would be available for regional water supplies and that restoration flows were dependent upon the future modification of the Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule. So if you look in section 1.4.1, you can see that description in those revisions to the technical document. In chapters 3 and 4, there were a number of revisions, but I'm just summarizing here. We clarified the definition of hydrologic terms, provided a summary of the hydrologic evaluation, along with more detail of specific areas that were ecologically important, especially in Northeastern Water Catchment Area 3A, and then provided more references for the ecological models that were used and were part of the information we received from USGS, and then tried to provide a better description of the projected changes to those hydrologic conditions. And in chapter 5, we provided more information about the PACR and the draft project operations manual in section 5.1.1. And then we added a new section specifically to talk about water that is expected to be returned to the EAA basin based on alternative 2A and those expected and estimated volumes. And Leslie covered that in her presentation, but that new section is 5.2.1. So with that, we're going to move into the public comment period. So any questions that you have, if you could enter them into the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll ask our moderator, who is Jennifer, to try and read through some of those questions, and then our team will provide live answers. So Jennifer, you want to take a look at those questions?
Thank you, Don. I have one question that's not been answered from Diana Pierre, And she's asking us to clarify what species are included in the rule definition of wildlife. And does it mean both plant and animal species? Is it only for those animals and plant species that are threatened and or serve as indicators?
Okay, this is Dongyun. I will answer for that. Thanks, Diana, for the question. So we have included a small fish model, apple snail, Cape Sable seaside sparrow, alligator, wading bird, including great egret woodstock, white ibis, and that's all we have. We have not included the crayfish model because we were limited to using the model from the original SAP PIR project implementation report, so that we have not included the crayfish model, but we use our best judgment to predict the crayfish distribution or potential change in the abundance. We have not included model specifically for the plant, but the CSS, Cape Sable seaside sparrow model actually is designed for the prediction of the Mar Prairie in Everglades National Park. So that's, I think, pretty much only model related to the plant, but all other the fish and wildlife model is the organism I already talked about. And the reason for choosing these species is for small fish and apple snail is because they are major energy source. And wading bird also is an important indicator because their productivity is integrated production of multiple trophic levels, and alligator also design the landscape. Also, we call the architectural species too.
Thank you. I have another question from Matthew Schwartz. He says, I noticed that in the pre and post-project simulations that water flows were not expected to change much during the wet season. Most changes were expected during the dry season. Referring to the graph with the blue and red lines, how does the EAA reservoir decrease discharges to the estuaries if the flow south doesn't change during the wet season?
Okay, this is Dongyun again. I will do my best. So I think we referred to the flow direction and magnitude map with lots of arrow with the different colors. Maybe not. I think it referred to the one of the Leslie's graph. But what I can tell you, yeah.
This is Leslie. I can take that answer if you want. So
Thanks.
with the added storage in the EAA, you're going to be able to capture some of those flows that would have been discharged to the northern estuaries. So during, if there's room in the reservoir during the wet season, instead of discharging those flows to east and west, you can discharge those flows south, and they'll be captured and stored in the reservoir and then metered off during the dry season. That's the simplest answer I could provide. And if anybody wants to elaborate on that, you can. But so it would capture those flows during the wet season and release them during the dry season.
All right. We have another question if no one wants to comment on Leslie's answer. We have Scott Lindars. There's a question, does the recreation management plan intend to include waterfowl hunting opportunities?
This is Don. I'll go ahead and take that question. You know, there's a number of different recreational opportunities that are well suited for environmental purposes: bike riding, horseback riding, nature study, you know, wildlife. viewing, as well as a number of other activities, kayaking, fishing, and I believe hunting is also included. So that is, if you want to see a more detailed response, it's located in the FAQs that are located on our webpage.
Thank you, Don. Matthew Schwartz, on his previous question, he asked again, he says, and when the reservoir is full, no capture. Is this correct? Leslie?
But yeah, I guess the simple answer would be yeah, if the reservoir is full but remember, it's a dynamic system. It's not just going to fill once and then be static. It'll be draining off into the A1 FEB, into the other STAs. So it's going to be like this constant filling and emptying. So, I mean, unless we get, rain for months, everything would be full. But if it's, I would say like an average year, you're going to see like this dynamic filling and emptying of the storage in the EAA. And so if you go back to the PACR, there's, plenty of model simulations that were run to show how over the period of record, the presence of the reservoir, the storage, and the SEP project reduces the damaging discharges to the estuaries.
Thank you, Leslie. I don't have any additional questions at this point.
So we'll give it just another minute. If you have any more questions about the presentation material that you just heard, please go ahead and type it into the Q&A feature, and we'll be glad to answer your questions at this time. So we'll give it another minute. If we don't have any more comments, then what we'll do is go ahead and move into the next portion of the agenda, and that is talking about the rule criteria. So we'll give it just a couple more seconds and then see if anybody else has any burning questions they would like to ask us.
I have another question from Matthew Schwartz. Was the EAA reservoir ever compared in any document to other alternatives that used more land?
Yes, this is Leslie Wall. So in the PACR, we looked at other alternatives that included a 360,000 acre foot reservoir. And in that case, we would, it would have taken up room on the A1 FEB in order to have the 360,000 acre foot reservoir. So through the process and during the development of the PACR and the alternatives analysis, just the 240,000 acre foot reservoir that did not include taking up footprint from the A1 FEB was selected as the alternative because it was the most cost effective. So we got the most benefit out of that project using the multi-purpose operations compared to the 360. And we were able to maintain the A1 FEB because the A1 FEB provides a lot of benefit to the system for treatment and storage. So yes, short answer, we did look at the 360,000 acre foot reservoir, but the 240,000 acre foot reservoir was the most cost effective and provided the most benefit.
Thank you, Leslie. Matthew Schwartz also says, I meant not included in the footprint of the projects, additional sugarlands outside the current project footprint.
So this, again, this is Leslie Wall. So we, under Senate Bill 10, we were kind of limited on the land that we could use for the project. It did limit us to land from willing sellers. So the footprint that we had was the footprint of the A2 footprint and the expansion lands to the west of that land. And we didn't have any additional willing sellers adjacent to the project area to use additional land, but we did do just kind of like a narrative evaluation of the Yellow Book alternative. And that information is all included in the PACR. And I believe there's some information in the EIS on the Yellow Book alternative, which included additional lands. But again, the cost effective and the selected alternative was the C240.
Thank you, Leslie. There are no additional questions at this time.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. I think at this time we'll go ahead and move on to the next portion of the agenda.
Oh, Don,
So
I apologize.
Yes.
Don, it's Jennifer again. I apologize. Matthew Schwartz says he understands. He says, so we went only with the limitations of the bill, and there was no in-depth science on what could have been achieved with more land.
Leslie, is there anything you wanted to add to the
Yeah,
comment you just gave?
through the PACR process, that Senate Bill 10 was the law that was passed that said, you have this sandbox to work in. So we, like I said, though, it was the most cost-effective alternative.
Okay.
Thank you.
you,
And there's no
Leslie.
further questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next portion of our agenda. And I'm going to turn it over to Alberto Naya in our Water Use Bureau. Alberto?
Thank you, Don. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alberto Naya. I'm the section leader for the Upper East Coast and Okeechobee section in the Water Use Bureau. And today, I'm going to briefly take you through what the rule is going to look like once it is incorporated. The next slide, Don. As mentioned before by Jennifer, the authority to construct the project and reserve the water is rooted in the Florida statutes. However, we need to adopt the reservation into Chapter 40E10, which is the reservation chapter of the South Florida Water Management District. The purpose of this chapter is to define the quantity, location, and timing of waters reserved from allocation for the protection of fish and wildlife. This chapter also defines the physical location of the EAA Reservoir. As you can see, it is located in Palm Beach County, south of the city of South Bay, between the Miami and North River canals. Next slide. The reservation consists of waters that are operational released from structures S24, S625, and S626 to the lower East Coast Everglades water bodies. This has been discussed throughout this presentation. This reservation also could convey as much as 825,000 acre-feet of surface water on an average annual basis. One thing I also do want to note is that the draft language is also consistent with the draft operating manual in the PACR of 2018. Next slide. The first item pertains, and this slide here pertains to the fact that it is a prospective reservation. In other words, water is reserved and available only when the project is constructed and the water becomes available in the reservoir. The second item is consistent with the previously discussed authority provided in the Florida statutes to do periodic reviews and revisions as conditions change. And the last item on this page clarifies that surface water released from structure S628 will be used to maintain canal levels in the Everglades agricultural area. And next. Water reservations are also incorporated by reference into Chapter 40E2, which is the consumptive use chapter, and has the purpose of regulating all water uses within the district. And lastly, the rule would also be incorporated into the applicant's handbook, which is the manual used by staff and applicants to complete water use applications. The last sentence on this page pertains to existing legal users, and it clarifies that consumptive use permit applications completed before the reservation adoption will not be using the water reserved. And this pretty much completes my portion of the presentation, and I'll pass it on to Don to complete the Q&A section.
All right. Thank you, Alberto. So at this time, we'll go ahead and take some additional public comment regarding the draft rule language. And I'm sure there's a number of different questions about the draft rule language. So we'll take those comments at this time. If you could kindly type in your questions into the Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar, and we'll be glad to provide live answers to those questions.
Thank you, Don. There aren't any at the moment, so we'll give it a few minutes.
Okay. And I wanted to let everybody know that if you want to take a more detailed look at the rule language, it's out there on the website. It's been out there for a couple of weeks, so feel free to take a look at that, and any additional comments you have certainly can be submitted during the public comment period, which is 2 weeks after this workshop. But if you have any specific questions, feel free to go ahead and include them in the Q&A feature, and we'll answer those. Well, apparently the rule is fairly straightforward.
I do have two comments that have just come in. Diana Ampierre is asking that we include the PowerPoint on the district's website, and to thank you, Don. And then also Matthew Schwartz is asking if we can post a link to the draft rule as well.
Okay, yeah, I'll answer. This is Don Medellin. I'll answer both of those questions. Diane, we will have these PowerPoint presentations available within 2 to 3 working days after the workshop. We'll have them posted on our EAA Reservoir website under the Water Reservations bookmark. And then also regarding Matthew's question regarding a link of the draft rule. Matthew, I believe the draft rule is actually already out there on our Water Reservations webpage. And I'll give you that link in just a couple minutes as I go through the next steps portion of the agenda.
Thank you, Don. I have another question from Diana Ampierre. Just to clarify, the rule does not protect the amount of water itself, but from where the water is released from. Is that correct?
This is Don Medellin. I'll go ahead and address that. The way the rule is crafted now, it's the water that is released from the reservoir and discharging through structures 624, 625, and 626, S626. Those are the 3 structures where water is being delivered to protect that's needed for fish and wildlife. And so that is what is being reserved under this particular rule criteria. So that should help clarify the intent of the water reservation rule criteria.
Thank you, Don. Matthew Short is asking if the link to the rule was provided in the packet of documents for this meeting today.
I'm not sure I understand the packet of documents it's being referring to, but I think what's being referred to is the notification that you received, Matthew. I think what may have been in that notification was certainly the Zoom registration, but I'm not sure about what information was actually included during that notification. But I thought that there was a link to the website, but we'll make sure we provide that information to you so you can easily access that information.
Thank you, Don. And Diana Ampere did type a comment that the rule is on the website.
Yes, that is
Thank you,
correct.
Diana.
It is. Yes. This is Don again. Yes, that draft rule criteria is currently on our webpage, so you can go to the reservations website and find that information and look that up, and it'll give you all the details you need, along with the technical document, the frequently asked questions, and even the final peer review report that we received from the peer review process. That's also out there for your review and to take a look at and provide any additional comments.
Thank you, Don. There are no additional comments at this moment.
Okay, I think at this point, we'll go ahead and move forward to on the agenda. So at this point in time, I'm gonna go ahead and cover the next steps and where are we going from here. And some of it was already covered, but just as a refresher to put it all out there for you to understand. The revised agenda, as I indicated, the technical document, the draft rule language, the frequently asked questions, along with the final peer review report have been posted since June 29th, which is 2 weeks before the workshop. And then we're accepting public comments until Friday, July 28th. So if you would, and that's 2 weeks from today. So that basically gave everybody roughly a month to review the documentation, provide us some feedback, not only during the workshop, but you can also provide feedback after the workshop. And then we intend to finalize the technical document. As I indicated during my presentation earlier from the peer review panel, all of that information from the peer review panel has already been incorporated. There are some other adjustments, and we'll take into account any additional public comments before we finalize that technical document. The comments can be submitted to Tony Edwards at the email address indicated. And as I indicated during the public comment period, the workshop presentations will be posted to our Water Reservations webpage 2 to 3 working days right after this workshop today. And then our next workshop is on August the 6th. So if you can mark your calendars, that would be great. And with that, I just wanted to go over the rule development schedule again. Jennifer Brown covered this in her presentation, but our next public workshop would be on August the 6th. And then we will move forward with the notice of proposed rule and then rule adoption in September and November governing board meetings. And again, you, the public, will have an opportunity to provide additional comments during those public meetings with the governing board. And then ultimately, we plan to have an effective date of the proposed rules on January the 7th of 2021. And some additional information that you all were asking for the Water Reservations webpage. It's at these links here. We also have information regarding the peer review and public comments that we've received on our website toolbox. So you can go there and see what kinds of public comments and those comment letters that we've received. And then also, if you have any questions about our district rules, those are also located on the webpage, and you can get that at that link below. With that, I wanted to first and foremost thank everybody for taking time out of your schedules today. Despite the challenging times that we're all facing, you know, it's encouraging to know that we can still have a large turnout. There was over 84 people in attendance today, and certainly we appreciate and you know, value any feedback you want to give us during the public comment period. And so if you could just remember that a couple dates and just put them on your calendars, and that is to have the public comments in to us by July 28th, and then mark your calendar for the next public workshop, which will be on August the 6th. So I just want to thank you again for your time, and please continue to remain healthy and safe until we meet again. Thank you all very much.